I came to bless my granddaughter's marriage, but my own son forbade me from touching a crumb of cake like I was a beggar. Amidst 300 cold stares, a white-haired stranger slipped an object into my hand and whispered, "Take this." I did not know him, but his gaze unearthed a promise buried for over 3 decades. The moment I opened what he gave me, the entire room began to crumble in a way no one could have predicted. My name is Martha Delaney. Standing before the towering glass doors of the Larkspur Glass Pavilion in the outskirts of St. Clair, Illinois, I felt small. I smoothed the fabric of my navy blue dress with trembling hands. It was a simple piece, bought on an installment plan that I would be paying off for another 4 months. But it was the best I had. At 58 years old, with my hair cut short and practical to stay out of the sewing machines, I knew I did not look like the other guests stepping out of their limousines. I took a deep breath, my heart hammering against my ribs like a frantic bird. This was Ivy's wedding, my granddaughter. I just wanted to see her happy. The security guard at the entrance scanned me from my salt and pepper hair down to my sensible heels with a look that screamed suspicion. He did not step aside to let me pass. Before I could even reach for the invitation in my purse, a young woman with a clipboard and a headset intercepted me. She looked frantic and did not offer a smile. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, her voice sharp and loud enough for the people behind me to hear. "Are you with the serving crew or the cleaning team? The staff entrance is around the back, near the loading dock." The words felt like a physical slap. I swallowed the lump in my throat, my face burning with immediate heat. I forced a smile that felt brittle enough to crack. I am the grandmother of the bride," I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper as I held out the cream-coloured envelope. The coordinator blinked, embarrassed for only a second before snatching the invite to check the list. But before she could wave me in, he appeared. Gavin. My son. He emerged from the crowd like a shark in a tailored tuxedo that likely cost more than my entire year of rent. He did not hug me. He did not smile. Instead, his fingers clamped around my upper arm, his grip tight enough to bruise, and he dragged me toward a shadowed corner away from the glittering entrance. "You made it on time," he hissed, his eyes darting around the room to ensure no one of importance was watching us. "Listen to me carefully. Mother, don't talk too much. Don't tell anyone about the sewing factory. Don't make me look bad tonight. Do you understand?" I nodded, unable to speak. He released me and pointed toward the back of the room without another word. I navigated through the sea of silk and jewels to find my seat. It was not at the long, decorated family table near the stage. My place card was tucked away on a small round table right next to the swinging kitchen doors, hidden behind a decorative floral screen. There was no one else sitting there. I was invisible here. Grandma. The voice was sweet and familiar. Ivy, my beautiful granddaughter, rushed toward me in a cloud of white lace. Her eyes were rimmed with tears, and for a moment, the coldness of the room vanished. "Oh, Grandma, I didn't think he'd let you." She never finished the sentence. Rowan, Gavin's wife and the mother of the bride, materialized instantly. She grabbed Ivy's arm with a smile that did not reach her eyes, her nails digging into the white fabric. "Not now. Sweetie, the sponsors are waiting for the photo op by the arch. Come on. We can't keep the investors waiting." Ivy looked back at me, helpless, as she was dragged away to serve the image of the perfect wedding, I sat alone as the reception began. I could hear the whispers from the nearby tables drifting over the top of the screen. Is that the mother? She looks like she bought that dress at a thrift store. I heard she works in a factory. Poor thing looks like the help. The shame burned my cheeks, but the gnawing in my stomach was worse. I had not eaten since breakfast to save my appetite for this meal, and the smell of roasted lamb was making me dizzy. My hands shook from low blood sugar. I decided I did not care about the whispers. I just needed food. Just a little something to stop the trembling. I stood up and walked toward the buffet table where servers were arranging intricate appetizers. I reached for a small plate. My fingers hovered over a piece of bruschetta. Suddenly, the sound of shattering glass silenced the entire room. I froze. Gavin stood 10 feet away, a broken champagne flute at his feet. His face twisted in a mask of calculated outrage. He pointed a finger directly at me, ensuring every single one of the 300 guests was looking. "Stop," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "Don't serve her. She's not family. She is just here to freeload 3 hours before the crash of the champagne glass." I was standing in front of the chipped mirror in my rental apartment on the south side of St. Clair. The air smelled of menthol and old lavender. I squeezed the last bit of analgesic cream from the tube, working the cold ointment into the swollen knuckles of my fingers. These hands had once been steady enough to stitch silk lining into coats for the wealthy men of Chicago, but now they throbbed with a dull, rhythmic ache whenever the rain threatened to fall. I picked up the needle again. The hem of my navy dress had come loose, and I did not have the $20 it would cost to take it to the tailor down the street. I squinted against the dim light, carefully pushing the needle through the fabric. "Just hold together for one night," I whispered to the thread. "Just one night." Once the hem was fixed, I opened the bottom drawer of my dresser. Underneath my winter socks sat an old cigar box that smelled of cedar and grief. I lifted the lid. Inside lay a photograph of my husband, Patrick, the edges soft and white from years of my thumb rubbing against them. Beside it lay a thick, yellowed envelope stamped with the logo of Hearthline Stitchworks. It had been sealed for 30 years. I had never dared to open it, terrified that it contained nothing but a final reminder of the pension they said Patrick was never entitled to after the construction accident. I pushed the envelope aside and closed the box. The phone on the wall rang, the sound shrill and demanding. "Mum, you need to be there precisely at 5. Gavin's voice came through the line, tight and vibrating with stress. "But please don't mention the past. The people attending tonight are important. They don't need to hear about the double shifts or the struggles." I gripped the receiver. "I know. Gavin, I just want to see Ivy. And don't wear that old coat," he added, his voice dropping lower. "Leave it in the car, if you have to." In the background, I heard a woman's laugh, sharp and tinkling like breaking glass. It was Rowan. I heard her voice, muffled but distinct, drift through the receiver. "Make sure she understands. Gavin, don't let her ruin the aesthetic of the family photo." The line went dead before I could say goodbye. I stared at the phone, a cold weight settling in my stomach. I remembered the years after Patrick died, when Gavin was just a boy with holes in his sneakers. I had worked days scrubbing floors in office buildings and nights at the sewing factory, sleeping 4 hours a night so he could have braces, so he could have a computer, so he could go to that expensive university. I remembered the day I signed the power of attorney papers 5 years ago. I had been sick with the flu, terrified of the mounting hospital bills and the complex legal jargon. Gavin had smiled then, handing me the pen, telling me he would handle the paperwork so I could rest. I had signed away my voice because I trusted the blood in his veins. I shook the memory away and picked up my cell phone to call Ivy. It rang to voicemail. A minute later, a text message appeared. "Grandma, come. I will try to meet you. Love you." It was short, rushed, but it was enough. "Today, I will be silent," I told my reflection. "I will not embarrass him. I will just be a shadow in the corner, watch Ivy smile, and go home." I picked up my small black handbag. It was worn at the corners, but it was sturdy. I checked the contents one last time: a packet of tissues, my lipstick, an expired library card I used as a bookmark, and a small, silver key that had been in my possession for decades. I did not remember what door the key opened anymore, but keeping it felt like holding on to a secret piece of myself that Gavin could not sign away. I walked out of the apartment and locked the door, unaware that I was walking toward a battlefield where my silence would finally be broken. The echo of the shattered glass seemed to hang in the air, vibrating against the high, vaulted ceiling of the pavilion. Gavin did not lower his voice. He pitched it louder, ensuring his words reached the servers standing by the kitchen doors and the wealthy investors near the stage. No food, no wine, no water. Gavin barked, pointing a manicured finger at the waitstaff who had frozen in place. "If she takes a single bite, you alert me immediately. Is that clear?" The head waiter nodded quickly, terrified, and pulled the tray of hors d'oeuvres back as if I were contagious. I stood there with my hand still hovering in the empty air, my fingertips cold. The hunger that had been gnawing at my stomach vanished, replaced by a nausea so violent I thought my knees would buckle. Rowan glided toward me. She moved with the predatory grace of a jungle cat, her silk dress rustling softly. She stopped just inches from my face, blocking me from the view of the main floor, though I knew everyone was watching. She offered a smile that was all teeth and no warmth, her eyes dead and cold. "Martha," she said, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that carried perfectly to the nearby tables. "You should understand that. Class has rules. This is a black tie event, not a soup kitchen. You don't just grab things with your hands." She turned to her back to me, addressing the room with a practiced, apologetic laugh. "So sorry, everyone. Just a little family confusion. Please, go back to your conversations." But they did not go back to their conversations. The silence was heavy, thick with judgment. I could feel 300 pairs of eyes on my old dress, on my rough hands, on the burning red shame creeping up my neck. Then, Blair, Rowan's cousin, stepped forward. She was holding a small plate with a delicate canapé topped with caviar. She looked at me, her eyes scanning my outfit with open disgust, and then deliberately tilted her plate. The appetizer slid off the porcelain and landed with a wet splat on the polished marble floor, right next to the scuffed toe of my shoe. Blair covered her mouth in mock surprise. "Oops," she said, her voice dripping with venomous amusement. "Well, if you are so hungry, there is some down there. Help yourself." A ripple of laughter went through the crowd. It started low but spread quickly. I saw phones raised in the air. The dark eyes of camera lenses pointed at me. They were recording. I was not a person to them. I was entertainment, I was the poor relation, the stain on the perfect picture, the spectacle to be shared and mocked in group chats. Grandma Ivy's voice broke through the wall of humiliation. I looked up to see her trying to push past her father, her face pale and stricken. She reached her hand out toward me, desperate to bridge the gap. "Dad, stop it." Let her Gavin grabbed Ivy's arm, jerking her back with a force that made her stumble. He leaned into her face, his mask of sophistication slipping just enough to reveal the cruelty underneath. "You stand still," Gavin hissed, his teeth clenched. Don't you dare embarrass us right now." "You smile." Ivy. Smile Ivy froze, tears welling in her eyes, trapped by the grip of the man who had paid for this day. Seeing her helplessness broke something inside me. I could handle the insults, but I could not watch my granddaughter be silenced because of me. I was the problem here. My presence was the weapon they were using to hurt her. I had to leave. I had to get out before I shattered completely. I turned blindly toward the exit, my breath coming in short. Ragged gasps. The room spun. The floor seemed to tilt under my feet. I just wanted to find the door, find the dark parking lot, and disappear. Clack. A sharp, distinct sound cut through the murmurs of the crowd. It was the sound of metal striking stone. Clack. Clack. I stopped. The sound was not coming from the guests. It was coming from the service hallway to my right. A man stepped out from the shadows. He was tall, with hair as white as winter snow, dressed in a charcoal grey suit that fit him with military precision. He walked with a silver-tipped cane, but he did not lean on it. He carried it like a scepter. He did not look at the cameras. He did not look at Gavin, who was still glaring at me. He walked straight toward me, the crowd parting for him instinctively, though I had never seen him before. He moved as if he owned the very air in the room. I shrank back, terrified he was security coming to escort me out, to throw me onto the curb. But he stopped right in front of me, up close. His eyes were a pale, piercing brown eyes that looked like they had seen everything and forgotten nothing. He reached out and placed a hand on my trembling shoulder. His grip was firm, grounding, stopping the room from spinning. He leaned down, ignoring the 300 people watching us, and brought his face close to mine. "Take this," he whispered. His voice was low, rough like gravel, yet it carried a weight that made the hair on my arms stand up. He pressed something cold and hard into the palm of my hand. Cal Whitmore. He spoke his name as if it were a complete sentence, requiring no title and no explanation. His voice was not loud, yet it possessed a resonance that seemed to vibrate through the soles of my shoes. He did not let go of my shoulder. Instead, he guided my gaze to the object he had pressed into my palm. I looked down. It was not money. It was a card, but not like any credit card I had ever seen. It was made of heavy, matte black metal, cold enough to sting my skin. Etched into the center was a small, stylized image of a black bird in flight, and below it, a string of numbers engraved in silver. It looked like a key, or perhaps a pass to a door I had no business opening. I can't take this," I stammered, my fingers trembling as I tried to push it back toward him. "I don't know you. Please. I just want to go." Cal shook his head, a microscopic movement that stopped me cold. "Don't," he said softly, his pale brown eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my breath hitch. "You will need it so they stop treating you like a piece of decoration." Before I could ask what he meant, He turned me gently but firmly back toward the center of the room. He did not ask for permission. He simply began to walk, and I found myself moving with him, swept along by the sheer force of his gravity. What happened next was something I had never witnessed in my 58 years of life. As we moved toward the center of the pavilion, the sea of people did not just part, they scrambled. The event coordinator, the one who had mistaken me for the cleaning crew, looked up, saw Cal, and immediately stepped back, lowering her eyes to the floor. The servers, who had been sneering at me moments ago, froze like statues, clutching their trays to their chests. It was as if Cal Whitmore carried an invisible shield of authority that forced the world to bend around him. Gavin, however, did not understand. He saw only an old man interfering with his carefully curated image. He marched toward us, his face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and rage. "Who are you?" Gavin demanded, stepping into Cal's path. "This is a private event. You have no right to be here." Security. But the security guards did not move. And then, I saw it. Behind Gavin, a group of older men in expensive Italian suits, the investors my son had been so desperate to impress, had stopped drinking. They were staring at Cal. Their postures had shifted from relaxed arrogance to stiff, terrified alertness. One of them actually set his glass down on a table, as if holding it in Cal's presence was disrespectful. Cal did not raise his voice. He did not even look at Gavin's angry face. He looked past him, scanning the room with a bored expression. "Who is the person who signed the contract for this hall?" Cal asked. The question hung in the air, simple yet devastating. It was not a shout, but it landed like a hammer blow. Rowan, standing a few feet behind Gavin, went rigid. Her fake smile vanished instantly. She looked at her husband, her eyes wide with a sudden, sharp panic. My company did." Gavin stammered, his chest puffing out in a defensive posture, though I noticed his hands were opening and closing nervously at his sides. Cal tilted his head, a faint, cold smile touching the corner of his lips. Which company? I blinked. In that second, a realization hit me hard in the chest. For years, whenever I asked Gavin about his work, he spoke in buzzwords: consulting, strategies, global partners. He never gave me a name. He never gave me a business card. I had assumed it was because I was too simple to understand high finance. But now, watching him struggle to answer a direct question, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. Delaney, Meridian, strategies, Gavin said. But the name came out disjointed, lacking the confidence he usually projected. Cal did not respond to him. He gestured to the table nearest the stage, the table reserved for the most important VIPs, the one with the best view of the bride and groom. "Sit," Cal said to me. "But that's not my seat," I whispered. The venue manager, a man who had ignored me at the door, was suddenly there. He was sweating. He pulled the chair out for me with a bow so deep it looked painful. "Please, Mrs. Delaney?" the manager said, his voice shaking. "Please, sit. Right here." I sank into the velvet chair, dazed. The room was spinning again, but this time, it was not from hunger. I looked up at the stranger with the silver hair and the cane. "What are you doing?" I breathed, my hand clutching the metal card so tight it hurt. Cal adjusted his cuffs, his expression unreadable. "I am just restoring order," he said, his voice low enough that only I could hear. And truth. Cal raised his hand and snapped his fingers once. The sound was sharp, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd like a gunshot. Immediately, a man I had not noticed before stepped out from the shadows near the stage. He carried a leather briefcase and wore glasses that reflected the harsh stage lights. He did not look at the guests. He walked straight to our table. "My name is Nolan Price," he announced, his voice projecting clearly without a microphone. "I am the lead legal counsel for the Rookford Hospitality Group, the parent entity that operates this pavilion." Nolan placed a tablet on the table in front of me. He tapped the screen, and a digital document expanded. It was a rental contract. I squinted at the glowing text. The venue was not rented by Gavin Delaney as a private individual. Nolan stated, his tone devoid of emotion. It was rented under a corporate entity known as Delaney Meridian Strategies. Cal leaned down, his breath brushing my ear. "Have you ever heard that name before?" "Martha." I shook my head slowly. "No. I only know that he works in consulting. He never tells me the names." Cal straightened up and turned to the room. The guests were silent now, sensing that the entertainment had shifted from a family drama to something far more dangerous. "This facility is under constant surveillance," Cal announced, his voice cold. "For liability purposes, every interaction in this hall is recorded. The insults, the refusal of service, the defamation of character directed at Mrs. Delaney. It is all stored on our servers. It is all admissible in civil court." Gavin stepped forward, his face glistening with a sheen of sweat. "Now wait a minute. This is ridiculous." "I paid the deposit." "You paid the deposit," Nolan corrected, tapping the tablet again. "But the service contract for the premium alcohol, the live orchestra, and the imported floral arrangements was signed separately as a credit extension, and it requires a co-signer, a guarantor." Nolan swiped the screen and turned the tablet so I could see the bottom of the page. My breath caught in my throat. There, in digital black ink, was a signature, Martha Delaney. It looked like my handwriting. It had the same loop on the M that I had used since grade school. But I had never seen this document in my life. I didn't sign this," I whispered, looking up at Cal. "I swear. I didn't sign this." Cal did not look surprised. He turned his gaze slowly toward Gavin. "Explain." Gavin laughed, but it was a hollow, cracking sound. He looked around the room, desperate for an ally, but even the investors were looking at their shoes. She forgets things," Gavin stammered, pointing a shaking hand at me. "Mom is getting old. She signed it months ago when we were doing the paperwork for her apartment. She just doesn't remember. He would not meet my eyes. He would not even look at Ivy, who was standing frozen near the cake, her face pale." Nolan swiped to the next page of the document. The screen turned red. "The payment for these additional services is 60 days overdue," the lawyer read aloud. "We have sent 3 notices of default. The total outstanding balance, including late fees and legal penalties, is $82,000. The number hung in the air. $82,000. It was more money than I had made in the last 3 years combined. Rowan grabbed Gavin's arm. Her fingernails dug into his tuxedo jacket. She leaned in close to him, but she forgot one crucial detail. They were standing right next to the head table, directly under the boom microphone for the speeches. "You said you handled it." Rowan's whisper blasted through the speakers, loud and distorted. "You told me the account was funded, Gavin. If this bounces back to my credit? She clapped a hand over her mouth, but it was too late. The room erupted in shocked whispers. The facade of the wealthy, successful power couple was cracking in real time. Cal ignored them. He looked only at me. His expression was not pity. It was a demand for me to face the truth. "Martha," he said softly, "you gave him power of attorney 5 years ago to help with your medical bills. You gave him the right to sign your name." "Correct." I felt the floor beneath me seem to dissolve. The memory of that day came rushing back, Gavin smiling, handing me a pen, telling me it was just to help handle the insurance companies so I could rest. I had trusted him. I had handed him my voice, my name, and my life because he was my son. Yes, I choked out. I did. "And that," Cal said, gesturing to the forged signature on the tablet, "is how he planned to pay for his reputation. With your ruin." I stood up slowly, my legs feeling heavy as if I were wading through water. The shame that had paralyzed me moments ago was evaporating, replaced by a cold, clarifying anger. I looked at the signature on the tablet, the signature that looked so much like mine, yet lacked the subtle tremble my arthritis had caused for the last 10 years. I looked at my son. "Gavin?" I asked, my voice shaking but loud enough to cut through the silence. "What else did you use my name for?" Besides this wedding, Gavin flinched. He looked at the investors, then at Rowan, and finally, he plastered a look of exaggerated pity on his face. He turned to the crowd, spreading his hands wide as if asking for their understanding. "I am so sorry, everyone," Gavin said, his voice dropping to a theatrical hush. "I didn't want to bring this up. Mum, she isn't well. She gets confused. She forgets things she signed. Sometimes she thinks it is 1999. We tried to handle her finances to protect her from herself. But, well, you see the result. She is making a scene because she doesn't remember agreeing to help us." The murmurs started again. Dementia. Senile. Poor family. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. He was not just stealing my credit. He was stealing my sanity. He was invalidating my entire existence to save his own skin. "Don't." Cal's voice rang out, sharp as a whip crack. "Don't use her age as a shield for your forgery." Cal nodded to Nolan. The lawyer tapped the screen again, bringing up a magnified view of the signature analysis. "This is a digital forensic analysis of the pen pressure," Nolan explained, pointing to the jagged red lines on the graph. "Mrs. Delaney suffers from advanced osteoarthritis in her right hand. Her signature has a distinct, light pressure on the upstrokes due to pain. The signature on this contract, however, was written with heavy, aggressive pressure. It was written by a younger hand, a hand that was not in pain." Gavin opened his mouth to argue, but he was cut off. "Dad, shut up." The scream came from the side of the stage. Ivy tore herself away from her mother's grip. She marched down the steps, her white dress dragging on the floor, and stood directly in front of me, shielding me from her father. "She is not crazy," Ivy yelled, tears streaming down her face. "She remembers everything. She remembers every birthday card. She remembers my work schedule. She is the only one who listens to me. Stop lying about her." The room went dead silent. A bride screaming at her father on her wedding day was not something these people saw often. Rowan rushed forward, her face a mask of panicked sweetness. "Ivy. Baby," Rowan cooed, reaching for her daughter's hand. You are upset. This is stress. Come here. Today is your day. Ivy slapped her mother's hand away. Today is the day I know who really loved me, Ivy said, her voice breaking. And it wasn't you. Rowan recoiled, as if she had been physically struck. Gavin looked ready to explode, his fists clenching at his sides. Cal stepped forward, effectively placing himself between Gavin and the two of us. He did not look at the drama. He looked only at me. Martha, Cal said, his tone shifting from commanding to intimate. I need to ask you something private. Do you still have the small old key? I froze. My hand instinctively went to the clasp of my handbag. The key, I stammered. You kept it, Cal stated, not as a question, but as a fact. Check your bag. I opened the purse with fumbling fingers. I dug past the tissues and the lipstick until my fingers brushed against the cool, jagged metal. I pulled it out. It was a small, brass key, tarnished with age, the kind used for safety deposit boxes decades ago. I held it up, the metal catching the light. I haven't used this in 30 years. I whispered. I don't even remember what it opens. The card I gave you plus that key. They open the same place, Cal said, staring intently at me. Think back. Martha, you were promised a safe deposit box, a safety net. A memory flashed in my mind, clear and bright. Patrick, my husband, sitting at the kitchen table a week before the accident. He had looked tired, covered in dust from the sight, but he had smiled at me. If anything happens to me, Martha, there is a box, number 19. It is for you, just for you. After the funeral, in the chaos of grief and debt, I had forgotten. I had thought it was just loose change or old letters. The box. I breathed. Patrick's box. I looked at Gavin. I expected confusion. Instead, I saw terror. His face had drained of all colour. He was staring at the small brass key in my hand, as if it were a loaded gun. He knew. My son knew about the box. You knew, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. You didn't just hide the debt. Gavin, you were afraid of what was in the box. Gavin took a step back, bumping into a waiter. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the desperate, feral look of a trapped animal. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The guests were no longer laughing. They were no longer filming a funny disaster. The wealthy investors were leaning forward, their eyes narrowing. They were looking at Gavin not as a victim of an embarrassing mother, but as a man who was terrified of a rusted piece of brass. They were looking at him like a liability. Cal gestured for me to follow him away from the stunned silence of the ballroom. We walked down a narrow corridor lined with velvet ropes, past the confused security guards, and into a small, windowless office behind the main stage. The room smelled of cedar and floor wax. It was quiet here, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound, a stark contrast to the storm we had just left behind. Cal approached a sleek, grey wall panel that looked like part of the decor. He held up the black metal card he had given me earlier. With a soft, electronic chirp, a section of the wall popped open, revealing a secure document safe. This is not just a membership card, Cal said, his voice low and serious. It is an executor's key. He reached inside and pulled out a thick, manila envelope. It was old. The corners were bent, and dust coated the top edge. On the front, typed in faded ink, were the words "Deliver only to Mrs. M. Delaney, in person." Below that were stamps from 3 different internal archives, showing it had been moved and stored for over 30 years. "Open it," Cal said. My hands shook as I broke the wax seal. Inside, there were bank documents, a heavy silver key that matched the brass one in my purse, and a letter. The paper was yellow and brittle. I unfolded it, and my breath caught in my throat. I knew that handwriting. It was jagged, rushed, the loops of the letters wide and messy. It was Patrick's handwriting. "My dearest Martha." I read the first line aloud, my voice trembling. I could not read the whole thing. The tears blurred my vision too quickly. But the essence of it hit me like a physical wave. Patrick had not left me with nothing. The letter detailed a small but protected trust he had set up quietly before he died, fearing the dangerous nature of his construction work. But more importantly, it mentioned a specific legal interest, a dormant clause regarding equity in a private supplier called Northvale Components. "Northvale Components," I whispered, looking up at Cal. I don't understand. Patrick was just a foreman. Why would he have shares?" "He didn't just work there," Cal explained, leaning against the heavy oak desk. "He helped patent a safety mechanism they still use today. He took equity instead of a bonus because he wanted long-term security for you. For 30 years. Those dividends have been reinvesting, quietly, untouched." I looked at the stranger with the white hair. "Who are you?" I asked. "You aren't family. You aren't a friend of Gavin's." Cal smiled, a sad, faint expression. "I am not a friend, Martha. I am the promise. I was the compliance officer at Northvale 3 decades ago. Patrick made me the trustee. He made me swear that if anyone ever tried to move these assets without your direct, physical presence, I would intervene. I work for Rookford Hospitality now as a senior administrator, but I never retired from being your guardian." He pointed to the metal card in my hand. "That card is the access token for the trust. It only activates when the system flags a fraudulent attempt to access the funds." Nolan, the lawyer, stepped forward and placed his tablet on the desk next to Patrick's letter. He swiped to a timeline of transactions. "Look at the dates. Mrs. Delaney," Nolan said gently. 3 months ago. 5 attempted transfers, all rejected because the signature didn't match the master file, all initiated by Delaney Meridian Strategies. I stared at the screen. The dates coincided exactly with when Gavin had bought his new car. They matched the week he had moved into his new house. "He tried to take it," I whispered, a cold numbness spreading through my chest. "He knew about Northvale. He knew about the money. He found the paperwork in your old files when he moved you to the apartment," Cal said, his voice hard. "He thought he could use the power of attorney to drain the account, but he didn't have the physical key, and he didn't have the master code. That is why he needed you here today. That is why he needed you compliant and silent. He likely planned to have you sign a revised authority form under the guise of wedding witness papers." I felt sick. The humiliation in the hall, the ban on eating, the way he treated me like a beggar, it was not just cruelty. It was a distraction. It was a way to break my spirit, so I would sign whatever he put in front of me just to make the pain stop. "He wasn't just embarrassed by me," I said, my voice gaining strength. "He was robbing me." "Tonight was just the surface," Cal said, placing a hand on the file. "The part you can see, the part beneath the water, is that They were prepared to take everything: your past, your security, your dignity. They wanted to leave you with nothing but the dress on your back. I looked down at Patrick's letter one last time. I touched the ink where he had signed, "Love, Pat." He had protected me from beyond the grave. He had sent an army in the form of one man with a cane. I wiped my face. I put the silver key in my pocket next to the brass one. "I am ready to go back out there," I said. Cal nodded, opening the door for me. "Good," he said, "because the lock is about to break, and you are the only one holding the key." I walked back toward the noise of the ballroom, no longer the trembling grandmother hiding in the corner. I was the owner of the truth, and I was done being hungry. When we re-entered the ballroom, the atmosphere had shifted from awkward curiosity to a tense, suffocating silence. Cal did not return me to the shadows. He walked me to the front, then nodded sharply at the venue manager. The manager, pale and sweating profusely, stepped up to the microphone stand where the best man was supposed to give his toast. The feedback whine of the audio system made everyone jump. "Ladies and gentlemen," the manager announced, his voice trembling slightly. "Please, may I have your attention? Due to a significant breach of contract regarding payment security and suspected identity fraud, we are contractually obligated to pause all service immediately. The bar is now closed. The payment terminals are locked." A gasp rippled through the crowd. The clinking of silverware stopped. In the world of the elite, being told the bar was closed because of fraud was a death sentence for one's reputation. Before Gavin could explode, another figure stepped forward. It was Reverend Halston, the man who had officiated the ceremony just an hour ago. He looked at me, his face heavy with guilt, and then he turned to the guests holding up their smartphones. "Put the cameras away," the Reverend commanded, his voice booming with the authority I had not heard during the vows. He walked over to where I sat and bowed his head. "Martha, forgive me. I saw how they treated you, and I said nothing. I let the fear of a scene silence my conscience. I am ashamed." His public apology was a spark in a room full of dry tinder. I saw a woman near the cake table, the owner of the floral company. If I recalled the van outside correctly, lean in close to Ivy. She did not whisper quietly enough. "Honey, I'm sorry," the florist said, looking at the extravagant orchid display. "Your dad. He owes us for all of this. He promised the check would clear tomorrow, after the wedding gifts were opened." Ivy went rigid. The colour drained from her face as she looked at the towering floral arches. She realised what I was just beginning to understand. The wedding was not a celebration. It was a fundraiser. Gavin saw his control disintegrating. He lunged toward Cal, his face purple with rage. "This is extortion," Gavin screamed, spit flying from his lips. "You are trying to blackmail me in front of my partners. I'll sue you for everything you have." Nolan stepped in front of Cal, calm as a stone wall. He held up the notarized letter from Patrick, sealed with the official stamp of the trust. "Mr. Delaney, this is not blackmail," Nolan said evenly. "This is a supervisory intervention authorized by your late father. We have the legal right to freeze assets to prevent elder abuse. And right now, you are the primary suspect." Rowan, who had been standing by Gavin's side like a loyal trophy, suddenly stepped away from him. The mention of elder abuse and fraud was too toxic for her to touch. "You said it was handled," Rowan hissed, her voice rising in panic. You told me the funds were yours. You forged her name. On my accounts too, Rowan. Shut up, Gavin snapped, but the damage was done. Ivy began to cry, a silent, shaking sorrow, but she did not go to her parents. She walked over and stood next to my chair, placing her hand on my shoulder. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Blair. The cousin who had dropped the canapé on the floor to mock me was trying to slip away toward the exit, clutching her designer purse. "Ms. Blair," Cal called out without even turning his head. Blair froze. "If Mrs. Delaney decides to file a civil suit for harassment and emotional distress," Cal said, his voice carrying effortlessly, "that video footage of you dropping the food will be Exhibit A. I suggest you stay put." Blair sank into the nearest chair, terrified. The room had changed completely. The wealthy guests, the potential investors Gavin had been preening for, were now looking down at their plates or checking their watches. They were not looking at me with pity anymore. They were looking at Gavin with disgust. They were terrified of being associated with a man who stole from his own mother. A tall man in a navy suit, one of the key partners Gavin had pointed out earlier, walked up to Gavin. He did not yell. He spoke in a low, lethal tone that I could hear from 5 feet away. "We are terminating the partnership. Gavin, tonight, if this is how you treat your own blood, I can't trust you with my capital." The man walked away. Gavin stood there, his hands shaking uncontrollably, his face the color of ash. Ivy reached for the microphone. Her hand trembled, but she gripped it tight. "My grandmother," Ivy said, her voice cracking, "worked 2 jobs to put him through college. She was the one who made me soup when I was sick because Mum and Dad were too busy networking. She is the most honorable person in this room, and if you can't see that, then you don't belong in our family." The silence that followed was absolute. No one dared to breathe. Nolan leaned down to my ear, his voice barely a whisper. "Mrs. Delaney, we have to move fast," he said, sending a chill down my spine. "I just checked the bank logs again. There is a pending request in the system, a change of beneficiary form for the trust." I looked at him, confused. "But you stopped it." "Right. It was filed to bypass the digital signature." Nolan whispered urgently. "It is a hard copy request scheduled to process manually. Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. If we hadn't come tonight, by breakfast." He would have legally owned it all. I did not run. I did not hide. For the first time in years, I sat completely straight in the velvet chair, my spine rigid against the upholstery. I looked at Nolan, the lawyer who was already typing furiously on his tablet. "Mr. Price," I said, my voice steady enough to surprise even myself. "I want you to revoke the power of attorney immediately. Lock every single account. If a single penny moves in my name from this moment on, I want it flagged as criminal theft." Nolan nodded, his fingers flying across the screen. "Consider it done. Mrs. Delaney, I am filing the emergency revocation with the county clerk's digital portal right now." Cal was already moving to the next phase of this dismantling. He waved the venue manager and Ivy over to the table. He placed a document in front of them, an incident report detailing the refusal of service, the public humiliation, and the admission of coerced debt. "Sign it," Cal instructed. "We need a record of the hostility. It proves that the power of attorney was being used against the principal's best interest." Ivy signed without hesitation, her hand shaking only slightly as she pressed the pen into the paper. She was burning her bridges, but she was building a fortress around me. I stood up and walked toward the side hallway where Gavin had retreated. He was leaning against the wall, loosening his tie, looking like a man who had just run a marathon in a suit of armor. He looked up when he saw me, expecting me to yell, to scream, to make a scene he could dismiss as hysteria. I stopped 2 feet away from him. "Gavin," I asked softly, "when were you going to stop? How much did you intend to take from me before it was—" "Enough," Gavin laughed, a dry, nervous sound that rattled in his throat. He ran a hand through his gelled hair. "I was just borrowing it." "Mum? It was just liquidity. You don't understand how this world works. The margins, the cash flow. I had to keep up appearances. If I looked weak, the investors would walk. I was going to put it back. Eventually." He looked at me with a mix of pity and frustration, as if I were a child who could not grasp the complexities of high finance. "You just don't get it," he continued, his voice whining. "You think small? I was building an empire. I did it for the family name. You starved me," I said, my voice cold as winter ice. "You forbade your own mother from eating at your daughter's wedding to save a few dollars on a catering plate. I understand the world well enough. Gavin. I know that. Anyone who loves me wouldn't starve me in front of 300 people." He opened his mouth to argue, but the sound of heels clicking on the floor stopped him. Rowan appeared. She was holding her phone out, her face pale. She was not there to defend him. She was there to survive him. "Ivy needs to see this," Rowan said, her voice trembling. She handed the phone to Ivy, who had followed me into the hall. On the screen was a group chat titled "Wedding Logistics." I looked over Ivy's shoulder. The messages were dated 2 weeks ago. Gavin put her by the kitchen door, behind the screen. Rowan. What if people see her dress? Gavin. Make sure the staff knows. No food. If we feed the animal, she will never leave. Feed the animal? Ivy made a sound like she had been punched in the stomach. She looked at her father with absolute horror. Rowan looked down, tears leaking from her eyes, trying to play the victim. He made me agree to it. Rowan sobbed. He said it was necessary for the brand image. Ivy looked at her mother with disgust, but she did not scream. She simply tapped the screen. "I just forwarded this entire chat history to Mr. Price," Ivy said, her voice dead. "It proves premeditated malice. You planned to humiliate her." Cal stepped into the hallway. He looked at Gavin with the clinical detachment of a judge. "You should know," Cal said, adjusting his cuffs. "Rookford Hospitality received anonymous complaints about Delaney Meridian Strategies 4 months ago. Vendors claiming they were paid with checks from accounts that did not belong to the corporation. I have been tracking your paper trail for 16 weeks. Tonight was not an accident. Gavin, it was a confirmation." Gavin slid down the wall until he was crouching on the floor, his head in his hands. I turned away from him. I walked back into the center of the silent ballroom. The guests were still there, watching, waiting to see what the old woman in the cheap dress would do next. I sat back down at the head table. I looked at the head waiter, the one who had been terrified to serve me earlier. "Excuse me," I said, my voice ringing clear in the silence. "I would like a plate of the roast lamb and a glass of water. Please." The waiter looked at Gavin's empty spot, then looked at me. He nodded respectfully. "Right away." "Ma'am." A moment later, He placed a steaming plate of food and a crystal glass of water in front of me. I did not rush. I picked up the heavy silver fork. I cut a small piece of meat. I took a bite. 300 people watched me eat in silence. It was not a meal. It was a reclamation, with every bite. I stripped Gavin of his power. He could not shame me if I refused to be ashamed. I looked toward the hallway where my son was cowering, and I knew he understood. I was not just taking back the money. I was taking back his right to look down on me. I was taking back my name. Nolan Price cleared his throat, the sound amplified by the microphone, demanding the attention of every soul in the room. He held up the tablet, turning the screen so the camera of the videographer, who was still rolling despite the chaos, could capture the document. Regarding the petition to change the beneficiary of the trust that was scheduled for processing at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, Nolan announced, his voice clinical and sharp. The signature on that request has been flagged as highly suspicious. Under the protective clause of the North Vale Agreement, Mr. Whitmore has authorized an immediate freeze on all assets and is transferring the file to the district attorney for an independent fraud investigation. The words hung in the air like smoke. Fraud. District attorney. Gavin snapped. He did not think. He simply reacted with the desperation of a drowning man. He lunged toward the table where Nolan stood, his hands clawing for the tablet and the papers. "Give me that," Gavin screamed, his face twisted and ugly. "You can't do this. It is my money." The guests gasped. It was a visceral, humiliating sight. My son, in his $3,000 tuxedo, was scrambling like a thief. The venue manager signaled the security team. 2 large guards stepped in, grabbing Gavin by the arms and restraining him before he could reach the lawyer. The elite crowd, the investors Gavin had spent years trying to impress, recoiled in horror. He had not just lost his dignity, he had exposed himself as unstable. Then came the final blow. A man in a dark suit entered from the private office, carrying a heavy metal box. He was a representative from the bank, summoned by Cal under emergency protocols. He placed the box on the table. It was labeled Forgotten Safe 19. The key, Mrs. Delaney, Cal said softly. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small brass key. My hand was steady now. I inserted it into the lock. It turned with a satisfying click. Inside, there was no pile of cash or diamonds. There was a single, thick document bound in blue paper. Patrick's supplemental will. Cal explained to the hushed room. He drafted this shortly before he passed. He knew Gavin was ambitious, but he worried about his character. So he added a condition. Nolan took the document and read the clause aloud. If the trustee finds evidence that Martha Delaney is being financially exploited or coerced by her direct descendants, the equity interest in North Vale components shall not pass to said descendants. Instead, the entirety of the portfolio will be liquidated and transferred to a charitable trust for elderly victims of financial fraud. The sole administrator of this fund will be Martha Delaney. The silence that followed was heavy. The crowd was stunned. This was not a fairy tale revenge where I suddenly bought a mansion and drove away in a sports car. This was reality. Patrick had ensured that if Gavin tried to steal from me, he would not just fail. He would ensure that no one like him could ever hurt me again. Gavin stopped struggling against the guards. His eyes went wide as the realization hit him. The millions he thought he was days away from securing had just evaporated. He had lost everything because he was too greedy to wait, too cruel to be kind. I stood up and walked over to him. I looked at the son I had raised, the boy I had sacrificed my sleep and my health for. You forbade me from eating at the wedding, I said, my voice low but carrying to the back of the room. So from now on, I forbid you from eating from my life. A chill seemed to sweep through the hall. It was a sentence of exile. Ivy stepped forward. She took the microphone from the stand. She did not throw her ring away. She did not scream. She looked at her groom, who was standing by the altar looking terrified, and then at her father. I am still getting married today, Ivy said, her voice shaking but determined. But I am marrying with the truth, and my new family will not be a place where we humiliate the weak to feel strong. Rowan tried to reach for Gavin's hand, sobbing something about misunderstandings, but Gavin shoved her away. He looked at her with pure hatred, realizing that the image she demanded he maintain was the weight that had dragged him under. Terminate the event. Nolan ordered the manager. The music stopped completely. The soft, flattering mood lighting was cut, replaced by the harsh, white glare of the cleaning lights. The magic vanished. The flowers looked wilted under the bright bulbs. The guests covered their faces, hurrying toward the exits to escape the scandal. Cal placed a hand on my shoulder. Patrick guessed right. He whispered to me. He knew you would choose dignity over cheap revenge. I looked at the metal card in my hand. Take this. I finally understood. It wasn't just a key to a vault. It was the key to my agency. Let's go. Grandma, Ivy said, taking my arm. We walked out of the Larkspur glass pavilion together, heads held high. We left Gavin standing alone in the centre of the empty, brightly lit hall, with nothing but legal papers and the echoes of his own cruelty to keep him company. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to relive those moments, but I hope it reminds you that dignity is something no one can take away from you unless you let them. I'd love to know where you folks are listening from today. Drop your city or country in the comments below, so we can see how far this family reaches. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video get recommended to more people who might need to hear it. Stay strong and take care of each other.